Welcome back to your Saturday research class, and we're now looking at crafting researchable problems. Before we begin, I want to situate this lecture in relation to what we have already discussed. In the previous lesson, we focused on reviewing literature and developing research frameworks, how scholars engage with existing knowledge and use it to structure their studies. Today's lecture takes us one step further in the research process. This lecture is about what all the research is about, the research problem. Before we review literature meaningfully or in a pendulum way, as I said, before we can build frameworks or before we can design methods, we must be able to ask a researchable question. And that skill, crafting a good research problem, is one of the most difficult and most important skills a researcher will ever develop. Many students believe research begins with data or methods, but in reality, research begins with clarity of thought. A poorly framed problem leads to weak questions, confused methods, and meaningless results. A well crafted problem, on the other hand, creates focus, coherence, and direction throughout the entire study. In this lecture this afternoon, we will learn how to move from ideas to researchable problems, from curiosity to clarity. We will examine what makes a problem researchable, how to evaluate ideas critically, and how to structure problems, questions, and objectives so that the research becomes systematic rather than accidental. By the end of this lecture, the goal is for you to see problems differently, not as vague concerns or opinions, but as opportunities for disciplined inquiry grounded in evidence, theory, and method. With it in mind, let's begin by clarifying what we actually mean when we talk about research problems. Allow me to share now my slides. Na. There. Crafting researchable research problems. So this opening slide introduces the overall theme of the lecture, crafting researchable problems. The title immediately signals that this session is not just about identifying problems, but about shaping them so they can be studied systematically. The subtitle tells us that this guide is designed for social science and military studies researchers, which is important. Research problems are always shaped by context, and what counts as researchable in one field may not be in another. This also emphasizes that this lecture will help transform ideas into meaningful, systematic inquiry. This tells us that having an idea is only the first step. What matters is what to do with it. In class, this is a good moment to remind ourselves that many research failures do not come from poor analysis, but from poor problem formulation. You cannot fix a weak problem with good statistics. As we move forward, let us begin by laying down conceptual foundation by asking us to understand what research problems actually are. Understanding research problems. This introduces chapter 1, which focuses on understanding research problems at a fundamental level. It reminds us that before we can solve problems, we must understand what makes a problem researchable. This draws an important distinction between academic inquiry and everyday questioning. Not all questions we ask in daily life can be answered through research. It also states something very important. The ability to identify and frame researchable problems is perhaps the most critical skill for emerging researchers. This sets the tone for the entire lecture. I usually emphasize that methods can be learned, software can be taught, and statistics can be practiced. But problem formulation, these require judgment. And judgment takes time to develop. To deepen this understanding, we need to examine the nature of problems themselves and why beginners often struggle to see researchable ones. Let's look at the nature of research problems. Sorry, it's very small. There. We need to explain that problems are part of everyday life. But academic research requires a conceptual shift. What feels like a problem does not automatically become a research problem. This is where we see the idea of problem blindness, the difficulty novice researchers have of really trying to also figure out a problem. You know, this is not weakness. This is a developmental stage. An important insight is that im- is that importance alone does not make a problem researchable. It's not always like that. A topic can be socially important, morally urgent, or personally meaningful and still be unsuitable for systematic study. This assures us that if we are struggling at this stage, it's okay. Research thinking develops through reading, through practice, through mentorship. To make this distinction clearer, let's directly contrast researchable from non-researchable questions. So there is a very huge distinction between the two. Let's move on. So this draws a clear boundary between philosophical or normative questions, and empirical research questions. On the left side, we see examples of non-researchable questions, questions that are abstract, value-laden, or unmeasurable, such as what makes a good soldier. These are these questions, do not forget, are meaningful, but they cannot be answered using data. On the right side, we see researchable questions, questions that focus on relationships, differences, effects, and patterns. These questions involve variables that can be defined, observed, and measured. So this is especially helpful for us who feel frustrated when their big questions are rejected by panels or advisors. The issue is not that the questions are unimportant, it's that they are not yet researchable. This leads naturally to identifying or to outlining the defining characteristics of researchable problems. So, what are key characteristics of researchable problems? So, we identify four characteristics of a researchable problem. One, operationalizable. Two, observable. Three, systematic. And four, bounded. Operationalizable means abstract ideas must be translated into describable or measurable terms. You cannot study leadership or morale without defining how they will be observed or spoken about. Observable means the phenomenon must be detectable through data, whether through surveys, experiments, or records. Systematic reminds us that research follows established procedures that others can evaluate and even replicate. Finally, bounded emphasizes feasibility. A problem must be narrow enough to study within real-world constraints of time, access, and resources. So, this gives us a practical checklist we can always return to whenever we are unsure whether an idea is ready to become a research problem or not. With these characteristics in mind, we need to be able to move from raw ideas to focused research questions. How do we basically move from one to another? And that's something we need to pay attention to, no? From ideas to research problems. Chapter 2. This marks an important shift in the lecture from having ideas to crafting research problem. It acknowledges something many of us experience. Ideas are easy to generate, but research problems are not. This explains the idea that often come this explains that ideas often comes from personal experience, professional practice, observations, or current events, but these are valuable starting points. Nevertheless, they are not yet research problems. This is where I have to remind everyone that enthusiasm alone is not enough. A strong research problem requires discipline. Ideas must be refined, questioned, and constrained. we need to emphasize that research problems emerge through reflection and engagement, especially with literature and theory. This reinforces the connection between this lecture and the previous one. As we move forward, we need to explain why many initial ideas fail to become researchable problems. So, researchers and the abundance of ideas. So, we introduce a reality that surprises many researchers. The problem is rarely a lack of ideas. In fact, experienced researchers often struggle with too many ideas, not too few. And we need to explain that ideas come from everywhere: observations, conversations, news reports, professional practice, and academic reading. Curiosity is constantly being triggered. However, the key message here is that having ideas is not the same as having research problems. Ideas are raw material. Research problems require evaluation and even discipline. In class, this is a good moment to normalize uncertainty. Feeling overwhelmed by ideas is a sign that your mind is engaged. It is not a weakness. And this prepares us to the understanding that a criteria must be put in place for evaluating which ideas are worth turning into research. So, criteria for evaluating research ideas. So, we emphasize that not all ideas deserve the same level of attention. Strong research ideas must meet multiple criteria simultaneously. This encourages researchers to evaluate ideas systematically rather than emotionally. An idea may be interesting but still impractical or unfeasible. In practice, this helps us move away from impulse driven topic selection toward judgment based decision making. This is where research begins to feel intentional rather than accidental. That's why we need to begin introducing formal criteria used to evaluate research problems and question. But this is already good enough: novelty, responsiveness, ethical worth, relevance, significance, or even smart. But there has to be more. And there you see the personal interest factor, no? So, to a certain extent, you need to be interested with your work. So, personal interest is a legitimate but insufficient criterion for research. This acknowledges that research is demanding and time consuming. Without genuine interest, motivation fades quickly. In that sense, personal interests matter. But also, we need to be warned that interest alone does not make a problem researchable. Personal passion must be disciplined by method, theory, and feasibility. This is where we usually say your research topic should interest you, but it should not be about you. The topic must be scholarly. This helps us strike a balance between engagement and objectivity preparing us to consider additional criteria. Now, the question is, how do we convert ideas into research questions? So let's mark a critical turning point. This marks a critical turning point in the research process, the shift from thinking about a topic to asking a researchable question. Many novices struggle because ideas often feel clear in the mind but remain too vague for systematic study. What we need to emphasize is that research does not begin with a question. It begins with an idea that must be read, carefully shaped, refined, and disciplined before it becomes worthy of investigation. This conversion is not cosmetic. It fundamentally determines whether a study can be designed, measured, and defended academically. At the first level, we see an initial idea. Leadership styles seem to vary based on how people behave. This is perfectly reasonable observation and a common starting point for research curiosity. However, it is still impressionistic. It reflects intuition rather than inquiry. There are no clearly defined variables, no population, no indication of how this idea could be tested. At this stage, the idea helps us notice a phenomenon, but it does not yet tell us what evidence would count as an answer. The second step shows refinement. Leadership styles may be influenced by behavioral orientation. Here, the researcher has begun to impose conceptual structure on the idea. Instead of a vague sense that behavior matters, we now see an emerging explanatory logic. Behavioral orientation is positioned as a potential influence on leadership styles. This is where theory begins to quietly enter the conversation, even if not yet explicitly named. Still, this remains a statement, not a question, and therefore cannot yet guide methodological decisions. The final line completes the transformation. Is there a relationship between behavioral orientation and leadership style? This is now unmistakably a question. Two variables are clearly identified, and the nature of inquiry, a relationship, is explicitly stated. Importantly, this question is testable. It can be answered using data, appropriate instruments, and statistical analysis. At this point, the researcher can begin making concrete choices about measurement, sampling, and even design. The question has moved from intuition to investigation. Having learned how a single idea can be sharpened into a researchable question, the next logical step is to recognize that this is not the only possible question that can emerge from the same idea. Different theoretical lenses and methodological priorities can lead to different kinds of questions: descriptive, comparative, relational, or causal. With that in mind, we now move forward to examine the multiple pathways from the one idea to many possible research questions, and how to choose among them shapes the study. Multiple pathways from idea to question. This slide emphasizes an important reality of research design. A single idea does not lead to a single inevitable research question. Instead, ideas are flexible starting points that can be approached from multiple analytical angles. The way a researcher frames a question reflects theoretical commitments, methodological skills, and practical constraints. Understanding these pathways empowers researchers to make intentional, not accidental choices about the kind of knowledge they want to produce. Descriptive questions produce focus on establishing what exists. When we ask what leadership styles are most prevalent among mid-level officers, we're not yet comparing groups or testing relationships. We are mapping the terrain. These questions are foundational because they generate baseline knowledge. Without knowing what patterns exist, any attempts to compare or explain them rest on speculation rather than evidence. So problem number one should be very descriptive. It should ask extent, status, and it should be very graded. Comparative questions or the evaluative stage move one step further by asking whether differences exist among groups. For example, comparing leadership styles between officers trained in service academies and those trained through ROTC introduces structure and contrast. These questions require clear grouping variables and sufficient sample diversity. Importantly, comparison presupposes description. You cannot meaningfully compare what you have not yet documented. Lastly, or relational questions, examine associations between variables such as years of combat experience and leadership styles without claiming cause and effect. Causal questions go further, asking whether one factor produces change in another, often requiring experimental or even quasi-experimental designs. Each step up this ladder increases complexity, resource demands, and evidentiary standards. Choosing a pathway means accepting those trade-offs. Once researchers understand these pathways, the next challenge is to learn how to organize them within a coherent study. This requires distinguishing between broad organizing questions and narrower actionable ones. We now turn on how research problems operate at general and specific levels and why both are necessary for a rigorous design. This slide introduces a core structural principle in research design. Well-formed studies operate at two levels simultaneously. The general research problem provides direction and purpose, while the specific research problem breaks the purpose into manageable investigative components. Confusing or collapsing these levels often leads to unfocused studies and even very weak proposals. The general research problem articulates the overarching issue that motivates the study. It captures why the research matters and situates it within broader scholarly or practical scholarly conversations. Because of its scope, the general statement of the problem is not directly answerable through a single analysis. Please don't do that. No, it doesn't happen that way. Uh, and it's just not that way. Uh, it frames rather than resolves. And that's something you have to pay attention to. Its job is to define the intellectual territory of research. Specific research problems, on the other hand, translate that broad concern into discrete, answerable questions. Each one targets a particular aspect of the general problem and can be addressed using defined methods and data. Together, they function like building blocks, each necessary, non-sufficient on its own. This structure ensures analytical clarity and methodological coherence. When researchers fail to distinguish between general and specific problems, they often ask questions that are either too vague or too narrow to justify the study. A strong hierarchy ensures that every analysis contributes meaningfully to the central inquiry. It allows reviewers and readers to clearly see how the study is organized and why each component exists. Understanding this hierarchy raises an important follow-up question. What exactly makes a general problem well-formed? To answer that, we now examine the defining characteristics of strong general research problems. There. This slide clarifies what distinguishes a strong general research problem from a weak or poorly framed one. A general problem is intentionally broad, but it is never vague. Its role is to establish significance, scope, and intellectual grounding, not to present something immediately solvable. A well-crafted general problem encompasses the full scope of the study while clearly marking its limits. It signals what is included and, just as importantly, what is excluded. This balance prevents research from becoming either trivial or unmanageable. Boundaries are not constraints. They are conditions for depth and rigor. General problems require theoretical support to justify why they matter. Theory explains why variables are worth studying and how they might relate. Without theory, a general problem becomes a loose collection of interests rather than a coherent scholarly contribution. This is why literature familiarity is essential at this stage. The general problem, also serves as organizing function. It anchors all specific problems, methods, and analyses to a central question. Readers should be able to trace every component of the study back to its problem. If they cannot, the research lacks internal logic. Once a general problem is established, the next task is turning abstract concepts within it into measurable elements. This process is known as conceptualization, is where theory becomes operational. That is the focus of our next slide. The role of conceptualization, but it's still not enough. Anyway, it's okay. So conceptualization is the bridge between abstract ideas and empirical research. Many research problems fail not because they lack importance, but because their key concepts are never translated into observable, describable, measurable dimensions. This slide highlights how frameworks make that translation possible. Terms like warfighting capability or leadership effectiveness are meaningful in practice but unusable in raw form for research. They bundle multiple dimensions into a single label, making direct measurement almost impossible. Without conceptualization, researchers cannot design instruments, select indicators, or analyze data meaningfully. Frameworks such as .MPLF breaks complex concepts into structured dimensions. Doctrine, organization, training, material, personnel, facilities, and leadership. Some stuffs are broken in this slide. Each dimension represents a specific aspect that can be operationalized. Frameworks provide discipline, consistency, and legitimacy to research design. Once dimensions are identified, researchers can select indicators and measurement tools. This is where abstract theory becomes data. Conceptualization ensures that what is measured actually reflects what the researcher claims to be studying. This is a cornerstone of validity. With concepts clarified and variables defined, researchers must now justify their choices. This justification comes from systematic engagement with existing scholarship. We therefore turn next to the critical role of the review of literature. This challenges a common misconception. The literature review is not a background section added out of obligation. It is the intellectual foundation of the research problem itself. Every major decision in a study, what to study, how to study, and why it matters, rests on prior scholarship. Literature provides the theories that explain why variables might be related. Without theory, findings become descriptive trivia rather than contributive to knowledge. Theory allows researchers to move beyond what toward meaningful interpretation, even in non-causal studies. Previous studies demonstrate which variables are worth studying and how they have been measured successfully. This helps researchers avoid reinventing the wheel and protects them from using invalid or idiosyncratic measures. Literature anchors operational choices in collective scholarly judgment. The literature also reveals which methods are appropriate for particular questions and contexts. It exposes common pitfalls and proven strategies. In this sense, the literature review is both a conceptual and a practical guide. It shapes design decisions long before data collection begins. Having established why literature is indispensable, the next question becomes which literature to prioritize, especially when working in specific national or organizational contexts. We now move forward to examine the balance between local and international sources. So we address a strategic decision every researcher must make. Which bodies of literature deserve the greatest emphasis? While students are often told to use more international sources, this advice is incomplete. Research quality, we need to remember, does not depend on geography alone, but on fit. Understanding when local sources matter and when international sources add value is essential for producing valid and relevant research. Local literature is especially valuable when research is conducted within specific national, cultural, or organizational contexts. Studies conducted in the same setting often operationalize concepts in ways that reflect local realities. Institutional structures and cultural norms play a role too. For example, leadership or discipline in one military context may differ fundamentally from how those concepts are understood elsewhere. Ignoring local culture, therefore, risks conceptual mismatch. Using local sources strengthens contextual validity. These studies have already confronted challenges related to access, measurement, and interpretation in the same environment the researcher now inhabits. As a result, they provide tested definitions and instruments that are more likely to work effectively in current study. This is particularly critical in military and security research, where context is never neutral. International literature, however, remains indispensable. It supplies overarching theoretical frameworks, comparative perspectives, and even methodological innovations. It connects local findings to global scholarly conversations and strengthens the significance of the study beyond a single case. International sources help researchers avoid intellectual isolation while still respecting contextual specificity. Once the literature base is strategically assembled, the researcher is ready to formally articulate what the study seeks to investigate. This articulation takes shape in a central component of any paper, the statement of the problem. The statement of the problem, or SOP, is the intellectual core of the research proposal. It's not merely an introductory section. It actually defines the logic that governs every subsequent decision in the study. If the SOP is unclear or poorly structured, the research design becomes unstable. So no matter how long the methods or data may be, a well-structured SOP articulates exactly what the researcher intends to investigate and why that investigation matters. It clarifies the focus of the study, identifies key variables or phenomena, and situates the inquiry within existing scholarship. In doing so, it provides readers with a clear roadmap of the research from the outset. The SOP should be understood as an architectural blueprint rather than a narrative summary. Just as a building plan determines what can be constructed, the SOP determines what analyses are possible. A strong SOP ensures internal coherence, questions, objectives, methods, and analyses all align with a single organization organizing logic. Every methodological choice flows from the SOP. Sampling strategies, instruments, and analytical techniques must all respond directly to the problems articulated there. When reviewers evaluate proposals, they often assess between whether the methods logically follow from the SOP. Misalignment at this stage is one of the most common reasons for revision or even rejection. To structure an effective SOP, researchers must understand how broad problems relate to narrower ones. This brings us to the core assumption underlying research design, that the whole is answered by the sum of its parts. This presents a foundational assumption in research design. If all specific problems are answered, then the general statement of the problem is answered. This principle governs how researchers decompose complex inquiries into manageable components. Ignoring this assumption leads to gaps, redundancies, or irrelevant analyses within a study. The general problem represents the total scope of investigation. It captures the central relationship of issue the researcher seeks to understand. Because of its breadth, it cannot be answered directly. It requires systematic breakdown into smaller, analyzable questions. The general problem sets the destination, not the steps. Specific problems represents those steps. Each one addresses a distinct aspect of the general problem and is answerable using data and analysis. Importantly, specific problems must be collectively exhaustive. No essential dimension of the general problem should remain unexamined once all specific problems are answered. This assumption also works in reverse. Researchers should not include specific problems that do not contribute directly to answering the general problem. Every question included in the SOP must earn its place. Extraneous questions dilute focus and weaken the overall coherence of the study. With this assumption in mind, the next step is seeing how it works in practice. We now move to a concrete example that demonstrates how general problems is actually systematically translated into well-aligned specific problems. So let's look at this one, for example. This slide operationalizes the abstract principle introduced earlier by showing how a general research problem is translated into specific problems. Examples like these are critical because many researchers understand the theory of problem structuring but struggle to apply it in practice. This slide demonstrates what alignment actually looks like when done correctly. The general problem asks, what is the relationship between behavioral orientation and leadership styles among military officers? This question establishes the overarching relationship of interest and defines the population. However, it is still too broad to answer directly. It identifies what matters, not how to study it. So the first two specific problems should be descriptive. One asks about the distribution of behavioral orientation, while the other asks about prevalent leadership styles. These questions establish baseline knowledge of each variable independently. Without this information, any attempt to test a relationship would lack interpretive context. The third specific problem directly tests the relationship between the two variables. Importantly, this question is positioned last, not first. It relies on the descriptive answers generated by the earlier questions. The sequencing ensures that any observed relationship is interpretable rather than abstract, or better yet, misleading. Having seen how specific problems collectively answer a general problem, the next move is to understanding how to order those specific problems logically. We now turn to the principle governing logical sequencing in research questions. Logical sequencing in specific problems. This paragraph highlights a deceptively simple idea. The order of research questions matters. Sequencing is not stylistic here. It is epistemological. The type of knowledge generated at each stage determines what can meaningfully be asked next. Poor sequencing undermines validity even when individual questions appear reasonable. Descriptive questions always come first. These what or to what extent questions establish the existence, distribution, and basic characteristics of key variables. Without description, researchers have no empirical grounding. Description creates the factual baseline on which all further analysis depends. Once variables are described, comparative questions examine differences across groups. This question reveals variation that many otherwise remain hidden. Comparisons often generate new theoretical insights and help identify conditions under which variables behave differently. However, comparison presupposes prior descriptive clarity. Relational questions come last because they are the most analytically demanding. Testing relationship assumes that variables exist, are measurable, and shows meaningful variation. Skipping earlier step risks testing associations that are poorly understood or better yet non-existent. To underscore the consequences of ignoring this sequencing logic, the next slide presents a cautionary example showing what happens when researchers ask how or why questions too early. This slide functions as a warning rather than a model. It illustrates how well-intentioned research can fail when sequencing principles are ignored. The example focuses on leadership training and officer effectiveness, an intuitively appealing topic that nonetheless requires careful structuring. The researcher in the example immediately asks how leadership training affects effectiveness. While this seems reasonable, it assumes that training types are known, effectiveness is already defined, and a relationship exists. None of these assumptions have been empirically established. Jumping too early into explanatory questions creates multiple risks. Investigating mechanisms for relationships that may not exist,